Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. This is an interesting and yet diffuse or nebulous topic for which people will try to overcome that by being very thou shalt about it. And I'm going to try not to do that, but at the same time, it's going to make this seem vague. But because this is one of those feeling things, not something where you can just look at it and say, turn the knob to 48 and you're golden. Mixing doesn't work that way. Music making does not work that way. I know there are many people who think it does and want it to, but the problem is they don't end up with anything that's of any great value. They might be like, it's Blammin' Man, but it disappears, and that's, well, it's sad because any potential that was there is lost. This is a real foundational, deep, inner understanding. If this was Star Wars, this is like trying to understand the Force. It doesn't matter what words are said, you don't get it till you get it. So while in certain ways I resisted this when it was first put forward to me as a question, I think it is actually really important. So the question that we're looking at is, what is timbre in music? Well, let's go to Wikipedia right off the bat. In music, timbre, not timber because that's wood, also known as tone color or tone quality, sometimes texture as well. It's a perceived sound quality of a musical note, sound, or tone. Distinguishes different types of sound production, what have you. So in simple terms, it's what makes a particular musical instrument or human voice have a different sound from another, even when they are playing exactly the same note. So we could have a bass and a flute playing the same note, literally, not even octaves apart. This poor guy's going to be right up here, but we can tell the difference between the flute and the bass. If we can't, well, there's probably something a little bit wrong. Now, a lot of people think that that means that there are very specific rules. There's not. Everything in making, and particularly in mixing music, is relative to everything else that is there. So whatever else is in the mix, and to some extent what is going to be around that mix. If we go to a party and they're playing Metallica, Megadeth, and Led Zeppelin, and then we start playing Kylie Minogue, then we may have a problem with the audience simply because the conflict has been created that what's around that Kylie Minogue song makes them feel like it's shit and get all kind of bent out of shape, which is sad. They should just be like, woohoo, Kylie, isn't it fun? But because their expectations are for more Metallica, Megadeth, what have you, the moment they start hearing Kylie, it's like, it's a different tone colour. Not right, not wrong, it's a different tone colour, and in that situation, not one they expected. The first question is, why do we care? Well, as I've said, it's about everything fitting relatively with what's around it. If we are at that heavy metal disco and everybody's expected to only hear heavy metal, then suddenly playing them Kylie is breaking expectation. Now, I've worked in some venues, DJs in some venues, where they developed a liking for specific songs that were a little outside of the expected, in which case you could play songs that you wouldn't in other venues because that crowd had created a relationship with that song that was outside of the box, and it became their thing, so it became part of the expectation. Now, the reason that I say that is to realise that the rules are not hard and fast. Hard and fast is what blind people do. They go, and it's nothing to do with being sighted or unsighted, it's to do with being mentally blind, being ignorant, as in choosing to ignore. What they do is they say, this is a heavy metal venue, we're only going to play things where they've got Marshall stacks and they're at 11. And you know what, if in certain ways we could argue that half of Zeppelin's content wasn't metal, because it doesn't sound like Poison. And then the very same people are going to say, oh, well, Poison had a hit, or Warrant, She's My Cherry Pie, had a hit, so therefore we don't accept that anymore. And that's fine, everyone can gatekeep or whatever they want to do, that's their business. But there are expectations. But, as I say, those expectations are based upon the situation. So if you're in a let's say a goth club, because it was goth nights that I often ended up DJing, as well as doing top 40 events. Then if you're in a golf club where they actually like Kylie Minogue, then playing the right Kylie song will go over a treat. But if you go into another golf club where they don't have that relationship, that desire, that expectation, then suddenly playing Kylie Minogue is just going to get you spat on. And you'll be picking mascara out of your eyes for weeks. So why we care is because everything is relative to everything else. And that's not about trying to be like, oh, well, nothing is anything, everything's everything. I'm not some kind of hipster, whatever. I don't subscribe to that point of view. Things are very definite. But tone, timbre is always relative to what is around it. So we need to care in the sense that we need to make things make sense. Now, the example I've chosen is a potentially dangerous one, but deliberate in the sense that we can also blow this one out of the water again. So we can be in a golf club where they play nothing but The Cult and Type O Negative, and then play Kylie Minogue. And it can work in that situation because there's something about that audience that makes it work, therefore it's relevant. But on the other side is the negative that I said of that, where you can go into clubs like that, and then if you dare play something, let's say, I don't know, The Cure, something off Head on the Door, and they can get all bent out of shape at you. That, oh, well, that's not goth, that's pop, that's... And there's a lot of that in music as well, where people make these rules about tone or timbre and then no longer honour the song. And this is the important thing. Relative to, tone is relative to everything else that's around it, and it's relative to what's in this song. So we need to have that as being the golden rule, the song, this song, not Depeche Mode's last 27 songs, but this song, the one right in front of us. Does it make sense here? Now, Depeche Mode changed direction a few times, and later I didn't manage to follow them, but in the early years, they just can't get enough, and then suddenly people are people. It's like, that's different. But it worked so well, it was so consistent within itself that we followed them. So really important, we care because we want the song we're listening to make sense. Which brings me to a musical giant, literally, as the case may be. Gene Simmons. Now, I have another quote which I commonly paraphrase because I can never find it, and then I found this, but I'm going to go with the one I paraphrase first, which is in a guitar magazine. There was a quote from him saying that, the guitarists spend so much time obsessing about their guitar tone. Find a guitarist. Always obsessing about the tone of their guitar, and will get incredibly bent out of shape with mix engineers who alter the tone to make it fit the mix. They would rather ruin the mix, ruin their song, ruin any chance of getting radio play than change their tone. And Gene's point was that, yeah, but that's fair. Really what matters is the kids saying, does this song rock me? Now, Kiss are a great example because they are held up as being paragons of heavy metal, but so much of their stuff that you listen to, it's closer to ABBA than it is to Megadeth. Now, that's not wrong. Kiss are a great act with a very definite path that they have gone. Gene is a very clever man. What he says here, and this is slightly on the side, but this is an important part of understanding timbre. By the way, there's nothing wrong with what AC/DC do. He was talking about melodic bass lines which are built more around melody than just the dum-dum-dum-dum-dum. And here he's talking about the dum-dum-dum-dum-dum kind of thing. He says nothing wrong with what AC/DC do, pounding along and plugging in with the drums to make a nice railroad track. But unless you have a killer singer and guitar player on top, which thankfully AC/DC do, that song's not going to go anywhere. And that's a real warning that I often try to give when people send over stuff. And yet they've got maybe a solid rhythm section, but then there's nothing on top, or what's on top is really weak. Therefore, it's not going to go anywhere. Depeche Mode, some people thought they were weak, but you know what? They still had something strong on top more often than not. People are people, so why should it be? Is strong in its own way. It doesn't matter whether you like it or not. It is strong in its own way. So the point is, there are a lot of different ways to finding the right line. He's talking about the notes, but it's the same here. There are a lot of different ways to finding the right fit of sounds, the right fit of timbre. And my take on timbre is that it's not just the sound, it's about everything that fits around it. So it's a very, very broad view. And this is a broad view that a mix engineer, and particularly a record producer, must have. Otherwise, they're going to be very literal. They're going to say, well, that's the in-bass sound, then we will use that very sound. And they will wreck piece after piece after piece by using these formulas rather than stepping back and going, what's this song about? I've got an example here. Now, this is from an exercise that I give to students at a certain point in time. It's not defined as to when it happens. There just comes a point where it's like, okay, we need to really test them and we need to get them thinking outside of the box, outside of the culture of you do exactly this. You know, like I say, assigning this fashionable bass preset, regardless of whether it fits the song or not. So I give people this piece that's got 4 parts, and it's all the same sounds through it, and I give it to them in the way you're about to hear it, and I ask them to do 2 stages. Stage 1 is to voice it, as in to take the MIDI and actually make the voices fit what the piece is trying to do. And then stage 2 is to mix it. And a lot of them really struggle with this because they go straight to going, oh, well, that's what a good, cool bass sound is. And then they choose them based upon their genre preferences. So rappy type people will just put in a sub bass, and industrial type people will put in a clangy FM bass. Rock people will put in a precision bass with some fuzz on it, and it's formulas, and then they wonder why the piece doesn't work. The piece was written in such a way as to, you can't come in with your ego and force it. So here is the piece as I hand it to the student. This is a piece that has no timbre. That sounds weird, doesn't it? It's kind of hard to listen to in certain ways. Why? Because every single sound's the same. There is no movement in those sounds. They're just literally square waves that turn on and off with the MIDI notes. So it goes through and, well, it's tricky. And this has no real sense in it because there is no timbre happening here. Or if there is, it's monotimbre, which is every single sound is exactly the same sound. So it's easier to say that there is no timbre here. What if we then take that and apply timbres? That's quite different now, isn't it? Now this is unmixed, this has sounds and is mixed. There's a big difference between these 2 pieces, even though they're the same. Here, we really can't tell the musical lines apart. Here they've got movement and space around them. Partly that's from mixing, but a lot of that is from defining the timbre of the sounds that suit the musical lines. And a lot of people miss that because they're trying, or they're only applying the formulas rather than going, what does this piece need to speak? We can hear layers of sounds doing things here. Here you can't really hear much of anything. So the reason this is important to see here and to really understand the difference is that this is the application of timbre. We've given each of these sounds a unique synth patch, we've made it work within the music, not just going, oh, well, this is the in sound, therefore I'll make that the sound that's used. So it's all about how the parts fit and create greater richness. And to paraphrase Gene Simmons, who says the kids don't care, they only care if it moves them, it's about having this piece deliver the message that it's meant to deliver, to tell the story that it's meant to deliver. Now, before some Captain Obvious jumps up and goes, well, I don't like that. So this is not about what you like. And that's part of why I deliberately give students this, because I want to have them move outside of their preconceived idea that all sounds are exactly like this, which is what Gene's getting across. You got to get outside your preconceived idea that everything be like this. When Kiss makes a song, it is made like a Kiss song. If you watch the documentary that comes along with Iron Maiden's Flight 666 concert, there's a section there where they are in the studio and Steve Harris, who is the band leader and controller of what happens, the arbiter of what is Maiden, and he's making sure that something that they work on sounds like Maiden. But at the same time, Maiden have changed over the years. I haven't listened to Shinjuku, so I have no opinion, but Book of Souls was quite a different record. It almost felt a little bit more 1967 than the 1984 of Power Slave. But at the same time, it's very recognisably a Maiden record. This is deliberately outside of what the average person is thinking to make them stretch and fit with the music. Sometimes you have to break people's preconceived ideas before they're able to conceive of a different idea. All of this works around what I will refer to as the transition of tone. This is a nebulous thing that if you try to look at it in one dimension and try to draw a picture of it and tries to make it one or two dimensional, and most people will try to make it that way and fail with it, which is a sad, sad, sad thing. Transition of tone is that in every angle we have got this continuum between none of that and lots of that. So if we look just along the bottom of here, on one end we've got silence, nothing, a complete absence of anything. And on the other end, we've got absolutely everything at once. So in musical terms, this would be total silence. Not a little bit of tape hiss, but total silence. A little bit of tape hiss can actually be telling us something about something. Absolute silence. It's creepy. The other end is too much of everything. If we're talking tone colour, then that silence works through that black noise. If you go watch the video on noise, I'll pop up the thing. It's relevant here. That would be black noise. We'd be working our way through brown noise up to white noise, which is everything all at once. Now, everything is actually overwhelming, just as total silence is overwhelming. If you ever get the opportunity to go into a real vocal booth in a real recording studio, not something someone's cobbled together, but like a real one, the first thing that you'll do is feel very uncomfortable, in the sense that you'll go in and you'll feel like dizzy and maybe that you want to throw up or lie on the floor and throw up because suddenly there is no bounce back from the walls. Your brain can't tell where you are anymore. Therefore, you get a kind of vertigo and you want to lie on the ground and throw up on yourself. This is normal. First time people are sent into a vocal booth, they're normally out in a couple of seconds. And the only reason that they weren't out sooner is because they wanted to appear tough. This is normal and absent of everything. And on the other end is too much of everything. So that's my argument against the loudness wars thing of everything being mastered at -1 LUFS, because there's no space to breathe. That's like standing underneath a jumbo jet with 1,000 sewing machines around you and trying to pretend that you're comfortable. You're not. You're just overwhelmed. You're like, "Ugh." The same as with total silence. It's somewhere in between, and it's the movement backwards and forwards that makes something good. Sadly, these days we tend to narrow it all down, so it's like if you listen to the common movie soundtrack, it's basically everything a little time slice here. Bap, 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 bap. Oh god, this is not interesting. Watched Toy Story 4 last night. It's the first time I've actually seen that one. I've enjoyed all of them up to there, and it was a really good movie too. And Randy Newman does a score, and it's a lovely score. You know, there's really nice movement everywhere. Tones, levels, all kinds of stuff. Nicely done. Which means that he's using a range in here, let's say sort of this to this, rather than just using a single slice. Timbre is about movement. There isn't one set point at which it is. And that's one of the problems a lot of guitarists have, is that they think that their guitar tone is a single set thing. No, George Benson is recognisably George Benson most of the time, because there's a range of things that are George Benson isms. Same with most great guitarists. You can pick them. Clapton, Page, Beck, all of them. There's something you can pick. Josh Homme from Queens of the Stone Age. There are things about him. And it's not his amp. It's about him. There's a range of things that are Josh Homme-isms. There's a range. People make the mistake of going, there's this one slice. I apply this one slice. And so that would be like taking this piece here, replacing the bass with this. Does this piece work now? Well, absolutely not. We actually just ruined it. Because we've said, oh, okay, that's the perfect bass sound. We've ruined our piece by including a slice rather than looking at our piece. So there's a whole range of silence to excessive amounts of sound, level from silence to excessive amounts of loudness, pitch being from low to high, the tone being from thick to thin. That bass sound that we dropped in there, it actually sounded really thin because it didn't make sense and it just speared through the rest of the mix. Therefore, it sounded thin. A less than experienced person would go turning up the bass and trying to make it seem bassy. And that's because they're chasing this rather than understanding that everything is a continuum. Light to dark, yes, that was obviously far too light. Bright to mellow, there was no mellow about that bass. The actual bass in here it's really mellow, isn't it? If we mute it entirely, especially if we mute the drums as well, the piece loses its center. Put the bass back in. The piece gets its center back because these other sounds are moving around that bass line, even though it's not the classic dum 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 kind of thing. So everything is relative to everything else. So it's a transition of tone. It's everything is tone over time. So timbre is not a specific point on a knob or a specific sound. It's a range of movement within that. Like a human voice, it's the one voice, but it's doing all of these things at once, as well as going we're able to produce this range of sounds, and that is the tone or timbre of the human voice in general. Now let's look into getting this bass to fit. So as you hear here, this bass is actually really important in the mix. But if we mute this and apply this, it's seriously horridly broken because it no longer feels relevant to this piece. Remember, timbre has to be relevant. It's relative to what's around it. So this is like going into a nightclub where they play nothing but teeny bop stuff and then playing Megadeth and wondering why the audience runs screaming for the corners and half of them have left before we've got to whether piece sells or not, because this makes no sense. So we need to work a little bit more carefully upon this. Pull this open. The first thing that we need to do, obviously, is to look at level. It's just too darned loud. There's no joy in this. So let's... Okay, at least level-wise, this vaguely makes sense. We can't mix it right now because it doesn't fit in the piece. It's timbre has no relevance to the piece, but at least it's not overawing the piece any more than entirely necessary. So level is one of our factors. We look at that. Whilst we're looking at level, let's also look at shape, because at the moment, it's kind of going forever. It's not uncommon for people to voice this like this, as in they leave everything open, which is the same as what you hear with this. In that we need space. Part of our transition of tone over time is that we need our sounds to have attack, decay, and release. Only a few sounds have actual sustain. The organ has eternal sustain, as long as you are holding that key, it will play forever. Strings, it's possible to create that. A string section can just keep doing this until they die. And if you've got enough of them, then well, you can just pull out the ones that are dying and replace them with other people and get an eternal smooth string. But there's only so long you can do that before the audience leaves, in which case we need movement. So if we take our piece, the overwhelming, that is timbre. That's part of the timbre experience, what happens to this sound over time. It allows the piece to breathe. So many sounds that people make, they're looking for the biggest sound ever. Boom, whack, 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 wee, whack, whack. There's no breathing, especially once they've then mixed that with so much compression and limiting and what have you. There's no space to breathe. And that is, like I say, standing underneath a Boeing with 1,000 sewing machines hammering away around you. You just want to run away. The same overwhelming feel that you have when you go into an anechoic chamber, vocal booth, that you want to fall over and vomit on yourself because the complete lack of information is massively overwhelming, because what happens is our brain turns up the volume of what we're trying to hear. It's going, okay, well, where are the walls? I can't hear them. I'll turn the level up. Still can't hear them. Oh, I better turn it up, until we are got a deafening silence, because there's no point at which we can turn it up and actually really hear anything past ourselves, and touching your own skin just gets super creepy. You can get some of that effect with like microphones and stuff like that, but you don't fully get it until you've gone into an anechoic chamber. So by handling tone over time, now we've started to improve our sound. That is timbre. We've moved this into the right octave. That helps, because up here, it's not really doing its job. Okay, that's better. Now we'll look at tone. This just goes from a sine wave out to a sawtooth. What if we change waveform? Doesn't fit. While that seems tempting to drop that extra octave, more manly, it suits the ego with regards to that bass sound, but it doesn't actually fit in the piece properly anymore. Remember, everything has to be relative to everything else. That doesn't work, that waveform. What is that? This does. Hear how there's more of a synergy? That's a very, very similar sort of tone. That's got a nicer synergy. Feel how it sort of settles in and sits. That's good. That means that it's a timbre that's better suited to this piece of music and the story that it's trying to tell. Now, we need to move tone over time. This is super important. So we need to grab ourselves an envelope. We'll grab this filter envelope, and we will apply it to phase mod amount, which is here. So that's going to be this envelope shape here. How much we want, don't know. It's tempting to do this. Does it feel like it fits with the piece? Well, I don't know. It doesn't. I hope you immediately go, that's not the same as the other sound, and nor does it fit with the piece, because it just punches through. The original bass line, it is carefully named fretless bass. And if it was easier to add information, it would be fretless bass played with rocker pedal. In which case we would go, this sound needs to be smooth and sinuous, as in it needs to flow. It needs that kind of timbre. And at the moment, what we've got here is just going pump, pump. And it's not great. Here-ho. I'll exaggerate this. You can hear it open up. We want to find the point at which this flows nicely with the line. We've still got the sense that it goes fuck on the beginning. Boom, boom. It's got a punch on the beginning. Well, we might say, oh, but that's all bass sounds need to have this punch. This doesn't want that. It wants to be sinuous. It's a fretless played with a rocker pedal. So all the... Now that's getting better. This fits a lot better, doesn't it? It's not just about trying to duplicate my own sound, but musically, this works so much better than before. We're not going to get exactly the same result because there's a different instrument used, but we should be able to get close enough. Let's look at putting it into mono. Even at looking a little bit of portamento. Because fretless basses, they don't have a fret to make a differentiation from one note to another. You're actually sliding up and down the fretboard. And that softens the punch on the attack. Okay. We've got something that now fits what we shall say time-wise. In terms of the tone, this fits. We are missing some things though. Some things are not working super well. One thing that's very common about this style of bass and bass playing, and as a record producer or a mix engineer, it's good to know your basics, your styles, and not just the one genre that you work in, but in other ones as well, because you can sort of go, I'm hearing something that's a little like yes in this. Then, okay, what am I thinking? Mid-80s, Chris Squire, chorused bass. This is how we get to know things. That's building an encyclopedia of tones, of timbres, which are not little time slices, but of, okay, how does that feel? What's that feel like? So that we can then go and replicate or create our own version thereof. Hear how that feels disconnected? Now that works a lot better. It's created this smooth flowing sinuous line that everything else is moving around. Really, really important. Let's have a look at to see if adding a little bit of drive is going to get us where we want to go. Because I kind of get the feeling that it could possibly benefit from a little bit of... Now that grunts it up. That does the same thing too. It's giving us a little bit of a burr on the top. Is it exactly the same decision I'd make in speakers? Don't know, but it's probably close enough. So now we've got something that's going to pull through the mix. Because this bass actually plays fairly high in terms of timbre. Now it has lengthened the notes a little. And the other timbre question, which people will go, oh, but that's not relevant because that's mixing, and I'm just making my tone. Mixing's really important because if you don't plan for it, it will be a struggle later, is that we're going to want to place this. So that means, you can see I've used a delay here. We do want a delay to actually place this. The moment, because it has no echo, it's got, it's going to the reverb, I assume. Let me just confirm that. Actually, no, it's not. That's a problem. We can do that. Now it's going through to the reverb. But it feels forward. It feels like it's in front of the mix, like here. Now, the role of this bass sound is not like, I don't know, Flea or something like right in front of everything. But even there, in a Chili Peppers mix, most of the time, Flea's bass is not as front as you think. There are times where it's front, but there are times where Anthony or whatever is singing and he's in front. We don't want this bass to be in front. It's the center, it's the spine of our piece. Everything moves around it. It flows, it creates this feel, and other things are part of the conversation around it. It doesn't want to be in front, it actually wants to be behind to have everything in front of it. So we need to move that a little bit. And this is part of tone. Remember, it's always tone over time. So timbre is establishing where do we sit at any given point in time and how do we flow across this period of time. In this case, the period of time being each individual note, boom, but particularly each phrase, boom, 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 boom. That needs to be taken as a whole. That's why in music, phrases are actually marked to be played together. Otherwise, without them, the notes become irrelevant, which is why it's very difficult for beginner players who are trying to play rigidly metronomically in time to feel like it's music, because they're actually separating everything out. And my sentence there was hard to make sense of. There was no emotional engagement with it. Sorry about pulling faces at you there. So we need to find a point in which our echo sounds nice and solo. I'm pleased with that. My point here is not, this is how you design a sound. There's a whole video on that, but the point is always, how do we find the right timbre, which is the right movement of tone over time? So notice how we had to, and this is why I chose this style of bass and composition for this, to force people to actually have to think outside of their assumption that it's just going to be boom, 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 boom. This isn't Kids in America. Much as I love that song, and Ricky Wilde's boom, 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 this is not Kids in America. So we've had to do the complete opposite of what we commonly think we're going to need to do to get a good bass sound, by slowing it down to make it speak over time. So that's our timbre moving over time in each note, but also across that phrase, and also with everything around it, so that the phrase flows with everything that is around it. Every sound in here is built to do exactly that. The brass sounds has several roles. It's got this big fat thing at the beginning, so they have to work together. And if we run through, let's just pop ourselves into the mixer mode. If we run through all the sounds here, hear how they're similar, but they speak in different places. Even where they're playing the same note, their timbre, the way they move over time, the way their brightness moves over time, the way everything about them flows. And that's what timbre really means, how everything flows. It's a global thing, a pile of spectrums from every different angle. We try to narrow it down to being one thing, but it's everything compared to everything else. Then we build up the how this piece flows. Like there's interplay here. We bring in a guitar, and then there's this cello line around it. And they have to work around each other, not to avoid each other. They have to work together to build this greater whole that is the piece of music. And that's the difference between guys who get in a band and then hammer away, like four guys hammering away, and say Led Zeppelin, who are four guys hammering away. But the thing is, they're working to make this greater whole, which is, most of their songs. While I'm not the massive Led Zeppelin fan, they did great work, and they did know how to work together. And that's because they understood timbre. They understood time. And it's part of why jazz is considered a fairly integral part to learning to play, because jazz is about conversation. It's about interplay against the other elements. Great classical music is as well. You listen to a well-composed piece of work, whether it's Bach, which is Baroque, or Mozart, or whatever, Mahler, any of these guys, old Cheeky Babe, then the way they've got these parts working together against each other is quite magical. Separate them out and you can have one guy who spends 14 minutes going dur, 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 and somebody else sitting next to him who's going do 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 do. But together, once you've got all those parts together, you end up with a mosaic that is, well, it's like when you get a puzzle, you tip your 2,000 pieces on the table and it's nothing. It's just noise, it's rubbish. And part of it wants to sweep it in the bin because it is pointless rubbish. And then once you finish, it's like, ooh, picture. We have to put our work together like this, and timbre is understanding all of this over time, relevant to everything else. We've got the same sounds again. There are 2 strings in here. It's easy to say, we don't need, because there's the melody. We'll do a reduction. Even though they're playing in parallel to one another, they're playing literally the same notes, but just an octave apart or something like, they sound so much better. We've also got this guy in here. No timbre. No timbre at all. There's no use of tone over time. It's horrid. This has got movement and space. Again, nothing to do with whether you like the music. It's all to do with, do the parts fit together? Have we created space? The mixing is part of that as well, in that, as you saw, I used an echo here to move that bass back and also to make it seem richer. So even though we made it 3 to 6 dB quieter, we made it fit, which means that it becomes stronger, even if it's not louder. And placing it with an echo, pushing it back, has made it fit. It makes everything work. It's a tricky concept, this getting the sense that it's not about setting a knob in a particular place and saying I'm golden. It's about listening to the note. How does it move over time? Listening to the phrase that it's in, how does it move over time? Listening to the whole line, as in beginning to end of track. Also listening to what's around it. Everything is relative to everything else. So timbre, tone, whatever word you want to give it, is this great big 3-dimensional understanding of the piece, top to bottom, left to right, silence to fully loudness, as loud as it gets, of initial concept idea through to the bit where Slash stands up on the piano and goes widdly, widdly, widdly. All of these things are timbre because it's how it changes over time. And if we don't understand time, and we don't understand that things need to fit together in layers, then we're prone to putting everything on the same. Think in terms of the bigger picture. What's my piece about? Have I got all the timbres that I need in there? And then are they working together? Because if they're not working together, it won't matter how amazeful your 808 line is, how amazeful your bass line is, your sub bass and your TB303 and what have you hammering away together. They won't do anything. And then if you've got no melodic movement, they're going to wander away, and then you need a good lead on top of that. And most times that is a singer. This is the role of, to a great extent, the composer. If the composer delivers something that's broken, it needs recomposing. An arranger, if the composer has come up with cool hooks and lead lines or what have you, but that's the extent of his ability, then an arranger should be brought in who will say, okay, I see what you're doing here, and I see where you want to go. Here, let's do this. That's the arranger's job. That's still a note thing, so that when it comes to the recording, we're recording the right things. Because if we record something that's fundamentally broken, we can never build on it. And then it comes to the record producer, who should be the guy in the room, girl, whoever, saying, I like where you're going, but this is broken. Let's fix this. And that's what the artist should be doing. But so often there isn't a third person and they're not stepping back themselves because they're thinking that production lies in drilling in ever deeper detail. As in like, oh, well, I'll get more little knobs doing more little things. I'll add 47 layers of production and that'll make it better. All you're doing is probably strangling the tonal timbre and the movement that you do have. Step back. Look at the big picture. Okay, does this work? Does this flow? Do the parts come together? If you can't hear it yourself, that is okay. That's what you bring a record producer in for, because they can step back and go, look, that bit's not really getting where you want it to go. And therefore you want to do this or this or this. Follow, take their advice, do this. If necessary, hire in a specialist. That's what session players are for. To me, it's better to have a hit with a session player on your record than it is to have a total miss, a total failure when you are too arrogant to use a specialist. The whole idea of specialists is that they know better than you. They're stepping back. The more specialist they are, the more they step back. And that seems completely the opposite. Timbre is about understanding the big picture. It's not about understanding the little detail. It's about understanding the big picture and then working out how to get the little details to fit the big picture. And people focus in and in and in and in, thinking that's going to get them a better result when they need to be stepping back to understand tone over time, as in what's the big picture here. Go back, watch this again. You may need to watch this lots of times. It's all about understanding the big picture and enacting little things. If you can't understand the big picture, don't feel bad about it. You bring in someone who has that mindset to step back and work on the little details and then say to you, hey, that bit, that's not really getting us where we need to go. Can we change that? And you change it and you try and then suddenly it'll click in and you go, oh, why didn't I see that before? So you learn by bringing in other professionals and work out what they've done and more to the point why they did that, why they suggested that. And once you feel it, then you're really starting to understand the concept of timbre, which is there's this great encompassing what makes this this. How do I make this more this? Complex stuff. If you have questions, please hit the subscribe button, ask them down below. Give some thought to your question and please be sure you've watched the video and understood the relevant section. My name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. There's also higherhertz.com, which is a different stream of information, a different kind of information. Most important, get out there, try this stuff, work with it, and work with others. And whilst doing that, make sure that you have fun.